Hello, and welcome to this live free webinar, Physical Activity in Isolation. We at SBK Healthcare would just like to say how proud we are to be delivering these events, and we hope that you find this useful and enjoyable. It gives me great pleasure to introduce your speaker for today, Joshua Kane. He is an HI-CBT therapist and personal trainer at iCope Psychological Therapies Service in North Camden. Hello, Josh.
Hi there. I'm just going to start my camera. Cool, great. So hopefully everyone can see and hear me. Thank you all for joining, and I really hope you find some of what we talk about today helpful. As Vanessa said, I'll do sort of 40 minutes going through the content, and then there'll be a chance for me to kind of answer any questions that you do have. So just briefly a bit more about me. As Vanessa said, I'm a psychological therapist who works in Camden IAPT. So my day job is generally kind of working with clients using CBT. Also kind of I work with people with long-term health conditions and then think about how we can use lifestyle interventions to kind of aid our practice. Also work as a personal trainer. So again, kind of linking those two things in terms of physical activity, behavior change, how we know that can help people improve their mental and physical health. And I've worked recently with Public Health England as a clinical champion for physical activity, which is kind of delivering training to healthcare professionals around how we can incorporate that into our clinical practice. And as I put on the slide there, I've got a kind of interest in neuroscience, evolutionary psychology, how we can understand human behavior, kind of using different disciplines, and then again, how that can inform our interventions. So aims for today, just to kind of define and understand how physical activity can help prevent and treat physical and mental health difficulties. Think a little bit about the factors that make being physically active difficult. You know, again, we all know how difficult it can be to be as active as we could be or as we should be. So we're just going to think a little bit about why that might be. And I guess if we understand why, that can help us to think a little bit more about what we can actually do to make changes. And again, then think about techniques that we might use, how we can apply those during the lockdown, and think about how we can also include some of those ideas with our patients. And again, I suppose the way I want you to kind of think about this is, you know, this is something we can all identify with. We can all understand or have probably all had times where it's really hard to be physically active. So we can, you know, think about using these tools for ourselves, but also then how we might apply them to the work we do with our patients. So I suppose just to define physical activity, because I guess often when we're talking about being active, we use the word exercise. And I guess exercise for certain people can have quite negative connotations. You know, we can think about school PE, team sports, things that maybe don't interest us or we really don't enjoy. So I guess physical activity is often used as a bit more of an inclusive term to mean kind of any movements where we expel energy or we use our muscles. So that, I guess, means that could include, you know, things we do for daily living, you know, whether that's carrying the shopping home, you know, it could be walking, kind of anything really, again, where we're sort of moving our body. And we're sort of distinguishing that a little bit from sort of, again, more kind of organised sports or activities that we might define as more traditionally as exercise. I suppose when we're thinking about that, we might think of activity on a bit of a spectrum. So, you know, we've got everything from asleep and just being sedentary, so we're not moving at all, through kind of light, moderate and vigorous. So, you know, light intensity, we'll be able to kind of very easily hold a conversation while we're doing it. Moderate intensity, we might see our lungs, our heart rate increase, sort of some physiological symptoms, but still in a relatively kind of comfortable zone. And then vigorous is where we might associate with more, you know, really hard, strenuous activity where it might actually feel quite physically uncomfortable. I think often when we're thinking about being more active, people have ideas about needing to be at that vigorous end. You know, to get any kind of improvement or to see changes, we need to be really pushing ourselves to the point where it's uncomfortable. And actually, a lot of the evidence and a lot of the research on physical activity shows that if we can increase moderate intensity activity, we'll see a lot of improvements in our physical and mental health. And I guess that links to the sort of Chief Medical Officer's guidelines on how physically active we should be. So, they recommend 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity. And again, moderate intensity might be, we sometimes use this idea of like a talk test to think about, am I working at moderate intensity? So if I could hold a conversation, but I probably wouldn't be able to sing or kind of throw my voice, that might show that we're working at that moderate intensity. And I guess they also recommend doing some muscle strengthening. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean working out in a gym or kind of lifting weights. That might be doing yoga, could be kind of carrying something heavy, or anything that where we're kind of just got some resistance or using our muscles in a bit more of a kind of strengthening way. And I guess just a word on sedentary behaviour, because I suppose even if we were to meet that 150 minutes a week, if we're spending a lot of our time being sedentary, that carries additional kind of risk factors for physical and mental health problems. So we have this term, sedentary athletes. So people that are kind of actually, say they do go to the gym or they do work out a lot, but then the rest of the time they're very, very inactive. So they might spend sort of 7 hours plus sitting. And again, that can also kind of impact on our physical and mental health. So I suppose this is particularly relevant during lockdown, and the fact that we're not allowed out as much, we're probably just moving less than we would normally, particularly if we're working from home. So some of the stuff we're going to talk about today is how we can actually reduce the amount of time we're sedentary for. And again, just some brief, again, this is kind of some health stats just in terms of the UK. Despite all the kind of public health campaigns and the ideas that we know physical activity is good for us, we're actually 20% less active than we were in the 1960s. And it's actually predicted that trend is going in the direction of, again, decreasing activity levels. And again, we're going to think a little bit about why that might be today. And I guess, it has a huge cost to the economy. It's linked to 1 in 6 UK deaths, whether that's kind of due to sort of low fitness and just generally kind of poor conditioning, things like heart disease, and other kind of conditions are definitely impacted by being physically inactive. We know there's a risk factor for depression and anxiety. People that are inactive are more likely to become depressed and potentially anxious. And yeah, there's again a kind of huge cost in that. Good evidence that exercise and physical activity has antidepressant qualities. Again, I won't go into loads of detail here, but there's been a couple of systematic reviews and meta-analyses that have shown and strongly supported that kind of exercise is an effective treatment for depression. And again, I suppose often we're talking about that moderate intensity of exercise, so not kind of running marathons or doing anything, hugely strenuous, but just actually increasing activity. And it's now in the NICE guidelines for depression that we should be kind of considering structured exercise or structured activity as a way that, we can increase or treat someone for depression. And I guess also the strong data suggests that people who are physically active just have a subjectively higher quality of life, which I guess kind of links maybe to that idea that it's preventative as well. So I guess one thing to think about, and again, I know we can't kind of do this interactively, but just think, why is it that we might struggle to be as active as we need to be for good health? What might be some of the factors there? And I guess there's a couple of ways of looking at this. There's kind of thinking about what is it about us as human beings that makes it hard to be active, in terms of just the type of animal we are, if you like. And then I guess also, what are the factors in terms of the society and the culture that we live in that might affect that? So I guess if we're thinking about those more kind of distal causes, when we think about kind of evolution by natural selection, we're thinking about basically behaviors that are good for survival and reproduction. And if you think about the vast majority of our kind of evolutionary history, we've lived in places where resources are quite scarce. When we're not kind of having abundance of food in the way that we do now, we have to move to basically stay alive. And I guess this neurotransmitter dopamine, which we're going to talk about again in a moment, essentially signals to us that we're doing something which is good for our survival or reproduction. And that means, if we come across or if we eat something fatty or sugary or do certain behaviors, that's going to be positively reinforced. But I guess where we might see a problem there is we no longer live in the environment where we evolved, or where we kind of became the type of animal that we are. And I guess this is where there's a crossover effect with kind of environment and culture. So, you know, if you think about, we're hardwired to crave those kind of foods because they're good for our survival and they give us a lot of energy. Now that there's an abundance of that kind of food, it actually means that we're susceptible to kind of overeat or use food in an unhelpful way. And I guess the same with physical activity, you know, whereas activity was probably very essential for us, again, in a lot of our evolutionary history, we now don't need to move to survive. You know, we can, you know, order food, you know, we can socially connect without leaving the house. And in some ways in the pandemic, that's actually been invaluable. You know, we've been able to get our food delivered to us. We've been able to speak to people. But obviously it does have this kind of downside that generally it's kind of making us less active. And I suppose just this idea of instant gratification, you know, being able to kind of have things quickly, which our brain loves. And, you know, it's very easy for us to kind of get those things. But now that can obviously have downsides for kind of our health and our physical activity levels. So I guess some of the, again, just pitfalls there. I spoke about delayed gratification. You know, if I was to offer you a choice between 1 chocolate bar now or 2 chocolate bars in a week's time, you know, would we delay the choice? You know, if you were really hungry and I had that chocolate bar here, would you be able to say, oh, actually, yeah, I'll wait? Or would there be a strong drive to be like, no, I want that now? And there's sort of famous research into this, the marshmallow test, which a lot of people might have heard of, where they did this with children, and they found, again, children found it very, very difficult to delay the instant marshmallow they were given, even if they knew they were going to get more if they could wait. And I think there's a kind of analogy there to sort of a lot of things that we do. You know, it's easier for us to sit on the sofa and watch Netflix than it is to sort of physically exert or to do something that's physically active. I guess this is another sort of psychological factor, that we tend to kind of put off things because we feel like we're too busy, or we're sort of, you know, in the future we'll have loads of time and ability to do things. But actually when, you know, a week, a month, a year arrives, we're just as busy, or we're just as kind of demotivated as we are now. So I guess that idea of focalism can really kind of mean we put off physical activity and never get around to it. And then I guess another sort of psychological factor might be, you know, because it's so in the news and because it's so, there's so much information out there that we should be active, that can actually lead to quite a lot of sort of shame and guilt around whether we do something or not. So, you know, actually telling ourselves that we should be doing something, or I must go for a run, I must be active during lockdown, you know, that can actually trigger a lot of negative emotion, which we know is likely to deactivate or kind of make us less likely to actually go through with something. So I guess these are just some of the factors that we might consider when we're thinking about why it is hard to be physically active. So I guess if we're thinking a little bit about behaviour change, one thing that's often talked about in this area of research is habits. And I guess in some sense, everything we do every day and the habits that we have essentially make up whether we're living a life that is healthy or living a life that is unhealthy. And there's some really interesting research in here that I'm just going to briefly overview. Some people might have heard of this study. It's done by Anne Gray-Beal, who is at MIT in America. Basically, the study was looking at sort of habit formation. So what they did was put a rat into a maze like the one you can see on your screen. There's a click, the partition rises, and the rat is free to run through the maze and find the chocolate. Now, what they do is they repeat this experiment numerous times and monitor the rat's brain activity. And what they find is, you know, the first 10, 15, 20 times you do it, you see really high brain activity the whole time the rat's in the maze. So when the click happens, when it finds the chocolate, when it's walking through, as it gets faster and faster and faster, what we see is that during the actual behavior phase, so when the rat is actually moving through the maze, the brain almost shuts down. You know, this is the similar brain activity you would see if the rat was sleeping. So there's kind of, you've got this starting point where the brain switches on and this ending point, but in the middle, there's almost this kind of shutdown and autopilot. And this has kind of been replicated in other ways. And essentially what's now a sort of universal term when you're thinking about habit formation is this habit loop. So I guess you've got a cue. So that could be environmental, that could be an internal state, could also be just something we already do, a behavior, so the habit, the thing that we actually do, and then a reinforcer or a reward. And I suppose often when we're thinking about behavior change, what we're really focused on is the behavior itself. So how can I make myself be more active? But often actually, and again, what a lot of the research shows us now is that we should be much more focused on our cues and on our rewards. So have we got something that's going to cue us into doing this behavior? And how are we reinforcing it? What is the thing that's actually going to make us do this again, rather than just the sense, oh, well, I did it, and that was good, because I guess without that positive emotion, without that reinforcer, it's really hard to kind of make habits stick. And I guess this is just, again, another illustration of how once we repeat a habit a number of times, if there's a reward, we might start to crave and actually be more likely to repeat something. So if we smoke and we develop cravings for nicotine, that means we're more likely to reinforce. If our phone is sending us notifications and it helps distract us from some of the stresses of the day, again, that might be a positive reinforcer that helps us to kind of repeat that behavior. Now, one of the reasons that physical activity is so hard to oh, and sorry, I should just say, that I guess there's been some estimates that about 40 to 45% of what we actually do every day is habitual. So thinking about that habit loop, a lot of what we do might kind of fit into that. But again, going back to our kind of evolutionary history, in terms of what counts as good or bad, is really just defined by the way our brain is wired. And as I say, dopamine, the behavior that signals a reward, can be triggered by things that actually, if we do them over and over again in the current culture, make us unhealthy. So it's very easy to have a positive feeling towards eating a bar of chocolate, maybe not so easy for something that's not as instantly gratifying, like, say, being physically active. And I guess this is the key thing, that because often physical activity doesn't bring us that instant gratification, and often actually might feel quite uncomfortable or unpleasant, there's less of an automatic reinforcement. And I guess one of the key messages that's coming out of a lot of the habit research at the moment is that positive emotion is key to creating habits. So if we're exercising but we're telling ourselves we were really bad, or we didn't do that right, or we weren't as fast as we wanted to be, we didn't do the workout well enough, or we're being, for other reasons, there's no kind of sense of reward, it's going to be very hard to make that behavior stick. And I guess a key thing about rewards is that it's an instant reward. So, sometimes we talk about this idea that, oh, well, if I exercise in the morning, I'll, let myself watch that show on Netflix later, or I'll cook myself a nice lunch. But I suppose actually, we might think of those more as incentives. So the incentives can help, but they're not directly reinforcing the behavior you've just done. So actually, we might need to think a little bit more about how can we create a more kind of immediate reinforcement of being active. And again, that's something I'm going to come to in a moment. So again, really brief overview there. Again, we might just be thinking about, well, if we know that cues and rewards are really important to behavior and what we do every day, how can we use those ideas to actually change what we do? And particularly during the pandemic, how might we use that idea? So there's a few things we're going to just talk about here in terms of actually practical ideas we can use to increase physical activity again. And this is partly for ourselves, but also for our clients and the people we work with. So again, we're going to link it to our behavioural and cognitive work that we might do in CBT, but also think about just our interpersonal effectiveness with people. So how do we talk to people about exercise? What do we actually say in terms of physical activity, and why it's good for us? So just linking on this idea of habits and behaviour change, again, I suppose one thing to think about in terms of this cue is we always need a cue for our behaviour, and I suppose one way that a researcher from Stanford called BJ Fogg has taught this or thought about this is, can I anchor a behaviour I want to do with a behaviour that is already very habitual? So we could use this kind of this framework of like, I'm going to create a habit that after I brush my teeth, I do 2 squats. After I put the kettle on to boil, I'll do 2 press-ups. And the key thing here, I suppose, is not only that we're anchoring it to a habit that we already have, but also that we're making it very, very small. The idea being that small behaviors and really small behaviors are easy. So we're not relying so much on just our motivation, which can be very unreliable. You know, some days we feel motivated, some days we don't. If we just rely on our motivation to tell us when we're going to do something, the days when we feel demotivated, we're not going to go stick to the habit that we want to make. But I guess this idea is that we're just saying ourselves something that doesn't require much motivation. Anything extra we do on that can be kind of seen as a bonus. The other part of this idea is, I suppose, that we're thinking about the cue, which might be an existing behavior, but we're also really putting an emphasis on how we reward ourselves. And this might seem like a bit of a strange idea, but one of the ideas from his research is actually this idea of celebrating. Now, I guess this is the idea that we're actually giving ourselves credit for what we've just done. So rather than potentially dismissing and saying, oh, well, I only did 2 squats, or I only did this small amount of exercise that I planned to do, what we're actually saying is we need to think about a way that we can congratulate ourselves. Now, obviously, this is going to be very individual for different people. I think one way you could think about this is, let's just say you'd applied to a job and you just opened an email to find out that you've got it and it's a job you've always wanted. What's your reaction? What do? Do you kind of punch the air? Do you sort of just feel really warm inside? What's the kind of feeling or the reaction you have? And could you be using that to kind of congratulate yourself when you do something? Again, this might sound like a bit of a strange idea to do, but I guess the key thing is we're trying to build that positive emotional association with being active, rather than, I think how a lot of people do it is, again, we set ourselves a massive goal, like I want to run 5K, I want to do it in a certain time. And then because we're not feeling successful at that, or it's really, really hard to run 5K if we haven't done it for ages, we start to feel defeated. We start to feel like, oh, I just can't do this. And actually, if we start really small, like maybe my goal is to run to the end of my street, anything else can feel like a bonus and anything else can feel like a success. The more we build success and the more we feel confident with doing very small habits, the more we might start to see a shift where we build that up. And actually that can shift our identity into someone that, do you know what, I am someone that can run. I'm someone that can do a home workout. I'm someone that can actually, be physically active enough. And I guess when we see that shift in our identity, that's often where we start to feel a bit more kind of like, yeah, this is just something I do now. This isn't something I have to kind of plan for. Similar idea here is kind of reward substitution. So can we pair the behavior that we want to do, like physical activity, with something we know we already enjoy? So kind of one that I've often used as an example is, let's just say we have an audiobook or a podcast that we really like. Can we make sure that the only time we allow ourselves to listen to that is when we're doing something physically active? I guess, again, we're thinking about, can we pair a behavior that we know we enjoy with something that we don't enjoy so much, and then trying to kind of, that can help reinforce that idea that this is something we like to do rather than something that feels horrible. So again, maybe just a question to consider there in terms of like, how can I use that idea to encourage sort of healthy behaviors within myself and within my clients? So I guess the other thing we should think about with cues is environmental factors. Now, again, this is a kind of almost a bit of a mantra now amongst kind of behavior change and habit research, in terms of, if we want someone to do something, we need to make it as easy as possible. Now that might sound kind of fairly obvious, but I think when we mean easy, we literally mean down to the level of kind of just where things are in our environment. One thing I've noticed in lockdown actually is, since I've moved all my sessions online, I've actually had a much lower DNA rate. Now you could hypothesize, well, maybe everyone's just more motivated to seek therapy now. But I suppose the other hypothesis could be, maybe it's just a lot easier to attend an appointment when you don't have to leave the house to do so. And I guess, again, these are the things that can really impact whether a behavior is done or not. So I guess if we're thinking about our environment, and also, again, most of us are spending a lot of time at home, we need to think about, okay, well, how can we arrange our environment in a way that will influence our behavior in the way that we want? So, do we have some kind of cue that helps us exercise? Is there a space in our house that we could clear and have it as a bit of a kind of exercise zone? Do we have a home workout video loaded up or something, something we can access very quickly? Are there people in the house that we can incorporate into this, where again, our environment is also directly affected by people we live with? Could we have a time where we do exercise together, and that's kind of our cue? I guess without that, it's going to mean the motivation has to be higher. It's going to mean we're just relying more on feeling motivated rather than arranging our environment in a way that helps us be active. I guess a linked idea is to maybe become aware of if there are contexts in which I know my motivation will wane. So, I woke up today and I really wanted to do a workout, but I know if I sit on the sofa and I've got the TV on, that's just going to make it really hard for me to actually stick to that plan. So I suppose we might need to become a bit more aware of what are our low motivation contexts. What are the places in our house or in the environments that we're in where we know our motivation just starts to drop. And I guess if we're aware of that, then we might need to think about, okay, well, how can I change things? How can I actually plan for the idea that that's going to happen? And are there reminders or ways as we can kind of prime ourselves to exercise? So could it be that, again, we have our exercise mats on the floor ready to go in one of the rooms in our house, or could we have it kind of in the corner of the room? Again, could we have the videos that we're going to use or the ideas we're going to use to exercise just kind of written out somewhere where it kind of, again, nudges us towards that behavior in terms of the environment that we're in? So again, this is another question just to kind of reflect on, maybe, is how can I design my environment, my home environment, to help me be more active during lockdown? And again, this could apply to a lot of other behaviors as well. What foods do we have in the house? Are we buying things that make it easy for us to snack? Are our snacks in a really accessible cupboard, or could we put them kind of high up somewhere where it's much harder for us to go and get them? And again, all these things might not sound like they're going to make a difference, but actually we know that the environment is so key to kind of how healthy we are. And then I guess, again, linking some of these ideas just to the interventions we already know well. So behavioral activation, planning our time. We're all kind of going through a situation now where our routines have been disrupted, but can we kind of try and structure our routines and kind of increase physical activity? I know one thing I've struggled with is knowing when kind of my working day starts and ends. So I'm trying to kind of punctuate that with something. So in the morning, it might be, again, going out for my daily walk. First thing, it's kind of almost like that's the start of my working day when I get back. And then maybe planning some kind of home workout for the end of the day. So that's kind of a signal for me to turn my laptop off and actually kind of just end the day in that way. These can be things that help us build routine. And again, we talk about this with our clients all the time. Being specific about what we're going to do, what time we're going to do it, who we're doing it with, and actually committing to that rather than, following that plan, rather than following our mood or our motivation levels, which can obviously fluctuate day to day. Again, this is an idea I sometimes do with clients, would be just to actually really reinforce the mood benefits kind of straight away. So again, I'd invite you all to do this maybe straight after the session, which is like, maybe just stand up and do 10 star jumps, something like that, jog on the spot for 10 seconds, do 10 squats. How did I feel after? What was my energy levels? How did you feel after doing that? Was there a little shift? We're trying to kind of reinforce the idea that we know exercise or activity can be good for us, but often we have to actually experientially feel that for it to kind of to feel like it's actually something that makes sense and becomes reinforced as a habit. This is, again, another concept that I sometimes talk about in regards to behavioural activation, where there might be a big kind of motivational gap between, say, sort of, again, being on the sofa and being outside on a walk or a jog. And I guess what we might need to do is actually very explicitly break down the mini efforts or the mini habits that are going to be needed to get us outside. So, we could just be saying, the first step I'm going to do is actually just get my running clothes on. And again, environmentally, where are my running clothes? Are they easily accessible, or are they kind of buried at the bottom of my chest of drawers where it's, again, there's a higher motivational effort to get there? Once I've got my running clothes on, could I just go outside for a walk? I'm not putting pressure on myself to run at this point. I'm just kind of saying, like, once I'm outside, maybe I'll jog, or maybe I won't. Once I'm outside, could I go into a really slow jog? And then again, we're just kind of building up via those mini efforts. Again, I suppose I think one of the big mistakes people do is they try and exercise in that vigorous zone. So actually, sometimes I say to people, I want you just to run as slow as you possibly can, to the point where it's not uncomfortable. It's just me jogging or even walking, where I can be, I'm active, but I'm not feeling really, really uncomfortable. I think that can be an important thing to focus on, where sometimes we have these ideas in our head of how we should be really active or should be working at a certain level. And these next two ideas are kind of problem solving in some sense. So again, we might be saying, if we're identifying kind of barriers, we're sort of planning for those barriers. So, there are certain things that I know happen often and are barriers. Well, if that happens, then what's my plan of action? If I think I've had a stressful day and I really feel like I don't have the energy to get outside and exercise, to get outside and be active or exercise, then what could I do? What do I want to remind myself? How could I kind of turn that into something that maybe is a reminder that helps me do something? And then I guess practically problem solving any danger zones. So I guess by danger zones, we just mean times where our intentions get interrupted by a sort of practical problem. So, I'm always really hungry at the end of the working day, so I don't have the energy to do a workout. Okay, how could we plan for that? Maybe I need to schedule in eating something at 4 p.m. Is it to do with my low motivation context? If I know that when I sit on the sofa, I'm going to really struggle, maybe I need to change into my workout gear as soon as I finish work. Have something loaded on my laptop. So again, we're just planning for those problems that can come up when we try and stick to these ideas. And again, I'm aware that I'm going very fast through some of these ideas. What I would say is, if you're interested, maybe, again, I'm going to recommend some resources and some reading at the end that you can do if you feel some of these ideas are helpful to look at more. So yeah, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to talk briefly about cognitions. So again, this is really linked to that idea of feeling successful and reinforcing the behaviour through a feeling of success. So we might need to think about, are our clients or ourselves really prone to this self-critical self-talk when or after exercising? So, let's say we do manage to get out and we do a jog. We could tell ourselves, that's the slowest I've ever done this, or the slowest I've done all year. I had to stop and walk 4 times. I'm really unfit. Or we could be saying, I managed to go out. I did something even though I was tired. I got to 3 kilometers. I kept moving the whole time. I've achieved more than if I'd stayed in. I'm working towards getting fitter. Again, these are kind of the feelings that will be associated if we think in those different ways are going to be really different. And sometimes I encourage people to think about, is there a statement or something I could be telling myself after I've managed to get outside, or after I've managed to do something active? Again, focusing on that positive reinforcement, or that celebration of the fact that I've just done something. And I guess this really links to kind of, in a way, self-compassion. And again, sometimes I talk about this coach analogy, which some of you may have heard. If you were going to say, learn a new skill, I'm going to give you the choice of 2 coaches. Coach A, every time you make any kind of mistake, he's going to say, you're really bad at this. You really shouldn't bother trying because you're just not very good at it. And because you're not very good at it, you might as well give up. There's no point trying. Or Coach B says, let's say I make a similar mistake. I can see what you did wrong there. I think there'd be some things we could work on, but it's really great that you're trying. I think you've done really well to kind of get as far as you have. And, it's really important that we kind of continue and work together to try and improve the way you're doing that. I think we all know Coach B is likely to kind of get us better results, but often the way we talk to ourselves, it's more in that Coach A style. I guess another way of thinking about this might just be, imagine we're trying to train a child to do something. You know, when a child is learning to walk, we're really encouraging. You know, every time they fall over, we're going, oh, come on, you know, let's keep going. We're very much being in that kind of Coach B, which we know is better for learning. We know is better for helping people kind of actually get, you know, learn a skill or kind of reinforce something that they want them to do. But often, again, it's that Coach A style. Sometimes, again, it's about drawing attention to that and thinking, how can we, improve in that way. Again, this is a sort of idea that I sometimes use in terms of directing attention. So how much are people fixated on, say, their negative thoughts while they're running, or the really difficult sensations? Again, I think if people are really finding it hard, I would be saying we need to take the difficulty back. You know, we need to go back into kind of our tiny habits where it's something really, really manageable and easy. But also we could be thinking about, am I able to use some kind of present moment focus or mindfulness ideas, which helps me just kind of be more in the moment when we're doing something active, rather than you're focusing on all the ways that we don't feel like we're doing it well enough, or how horrible and sweaty we feel, or all those kind of difficult thoughts that can come up when we're exerting. Again, this could be just something that we think about in terms of responding to self-criticism, and some ideas of how we can reframe those. So I'm just going to briefly run through these, and I'm running out of time. Motivational interviewing, again, I could probably do a whole session on this, but this is, again, time limited. So this is just the idea of how we actually talk to our clients in terms of interpersonal effectiveness. There's a great website, Moving Medicine, which I want to point people in the direction of, talks us through how we can actually have these conversations using that motivational interviewing style. And it gives us different kind of guidance depending on if we only have 1 minute, if we have 5 minutes, or if we have longer. So again, there's some really good resources on there which talk through how we can be interpersonally effective. Psychoeducation, again, we talked about this before, but essentially giving people information. So, you know, we know that the mood benefits of being regularly physically active in many ways are comparable to some of the medications that we prescribe for depression. But obviously there's none of the negative side effects that we would see potentially from an antidepressant or an SSRI. Can increase energy levels, can improve our concentration, allows us to cope better with stress. We might actually develop a skill of being comfortable, feeling uncomfortable, which I suppose in a lot of psychological therapy, that's actually what we're trying to help people do. And obviously there's some more on there, which, and again, the Moving Medicine website has a really good way of summarizing some of these benefits. So again, these are a couple of infographics I've taken from the website, which we can give to people or point people in the direction of. So yeah, and they've got not just for sort of mental health, but also for sort of physical health like pain or COPD, just some really good kind of information there. Resources, I really like the YouTube channel Fitness Blender. It's got lots of home workouts we can use in isolation, ranging from kind of easy to difficult. Most of them don't require any equipment. So again, there's stuff that we can do and recommend to patients. I mentioned the Moving Medicine website, Get Set to Go. There's some useful information there about how we can be more physically active. Apps, Couch to 5K is great. People might have used that. Just kind of getting people to start really small. Again, going back to our idea of tiny habits and then build up slowly. Nike Training Club have actually paired with Headspace. So again, in terms of incorporating mindfulness into our training, there's some guided runs where we're actually sort of almost using Headspace while we're running. And obviously there's a few other ones on there that's worth kind of looking at. So yeah, it might just be worth thinking again. I know I covered all those things quite quickly, and it's really just kind of, I guess, in the time we have, an introduction to some of these things around behaviour change. But I just encourage you to just take a few moments after the session to reflect on what you could take forward from today. How could you incorporate it into your own lives, but also clinical practice? Some further reading there. So again, this Exercise, Mood and Anxiety book is really, really good. Tiny Habits, which I spoke about. The Power of Habit is a good book. And this Brain Train booklet, which was produced by UCL, is a sort of self-help guide for patients, which if people are interested in, yeah, there are ways of getting hold of that. Just going to see if I can look at some of these questions. Could we use this with someone experiencing long-term conditions and anxiety? Yes, definitely. I think physical activity is often what's very much recommended for people with, you know, whether that's heart conditions, chronic pain. Again, I'm going to kind of point you in the direction of moving medicine. It has lots of information about specific health problems and how we can talk to patients with those difficulties. Again, we know that we can actually really help increase functioning and reduce disability by getting people active. But I think we have to approach those conversations quite empathically. Often people have quite strong ideas about exercise or about being active. You know, for example, someone with chronic pain might assume that if the activity is making the pain worse, that shows they're doing more damage to their body. And actually, often that isn't the case. It's kind of a short-term effect, but the more we're active, actually, well, it changes our experience of pain in a positive way. Again, I suppose if we are concerned about whether we should be encouraging someone with long-term health conditions to be active, generally the guidance from public health is most people will be fine to do something, you know, even if it's quite light or moderate, thinking about our scale. Obviously, we can always check with GPs if we're really concerned or we think we need to kind of just get a sort of medical opinion. But generally, yeah, it's a great thing to do with people who have long-term conditions. And anxiety as well, I should mention, kind of, I guess, actually being able to sort of deal with stress is something that isn't talked about as much in the research, but there's actually some research about how when we're more physically conditioned, so we have, you know, a stronger heart and kind of better lung capacity, when we're able to deal with stressful events, they have a kind of lower physiological impact on the body. And I think that's kind of an increasing area of research that will sort of come. Let's see what else we've got. Does standing at a desk decrease sedentary behaviour? It does. Standing desks, I think, again, are becoming more and more widespread, probably more in the private sector than in the NHS. When we're standing, we're actually expelling a lot more energy than when we're sitting. And I think actually, yeah, just kind of standing and moving for 2 minutes can have a big impact on the body. I mean, I think if we're standing at the desk, often it is good to sort of try and break that up with just, yeah, moving a little bit more. You know, again, maybe that's even just like walking to the kitchen and back to get a glass of water. But definitely standing is better. And I think actually that wouldn't count as sedentary behaviour. You'd be talking about very light activity by standing. Let's see. Is it better to break exercises during the day or have a big chunk of exercise perhaps at the end of the day? Again, I suppose this kind of comes down as to, I guess, whether we're defining, because I suppose physical activity should really be happening throughout the day. So, you know, we should be thinking about trying to move more. And I think that could be everything from, again, like doing really brief bursts of activity. So maybe just on the spot doing like 2 or 3 star jumps, going for a really short, like walk outside if we're allowed to. And yeah, but I suppose in terms of actually like planning a workout, sometimes it is better to have an actual kind of structured time of the day to do that. So, you know, maybe I've planned from 5 till 5:30 at the end of the working day, I'm going to do a workout video, or I'm going to do something in my house. And sometimes that can be a good thing to do as well. But I think just generally reducing the amount of time we're sedentary and the amount of time that we're just sitting is really key to sort of seeing some of these benefits. Do you have any tips regarding supporting clients to exercise who have a lot of physical restrictions due to injuries and conditions? I had a client who used to go swimming as a low impact exercise, but he can no longer do this. Yes, I think this is a really good question. I think it slightly links to what I was talking about earlier with people with long-term health conditions. I think we have to be mindful of what people's limitations are. And I guess in terms of actually coming up with a plan, one of the big barriers can be that if we have a physical health injury or a physical health condition or an injury, we might not know what is still okay to do. And I think actually helping people kind of find that out might be the first step here. You know, what am I allowed to do with my injury? What is still manageable? You know, obviously in lockdown, we might be even more limited because we might not be able to use swimming pools or, but I think there are sources of information out there. Again, I often think about whether if we have these exercise on referral schemes or exercise on prescription. Now, again, those tend not to be running so much in isolation or in lockdown, but they can often be sources of advice. So if you kind of do have links with those, they can potentially be offering advice over the phone or thinking about the PTs that work in the local council gyms. They can sometimes offer people advice, even if they're not actually referred to the programme. Obviously, some GPs as well might be able to kind of advise on that. But I guess once we've established what is actually suitable for that client and what's actually kind of okay, then I guess the same principles apply that we've been talking about today. So yeah, how can we actually overcome those motivational barriers that might be very much related to the condition or the injury? Again, it's hard because I know we haven't had much time today, but I guess sometimes motivational interviewing is key with these clients, or with the, you know, when we're thinking about this, in terms of we really need to empathize with the fact that this is going to be challenging. You know, it's going to be more challenging to our motivation when there's kind of physical barriers. So yeah, I think that's something. And again, moving medicine, there's lots of resources online. So it's Stephen Rolnick and Bill Miller, I think, are the two researchers. If you Google motivational interviewing, they've got lots of papers and things in terms of like how we actually might incorporate that. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, but I know it's hard to kind of go into lots of detail with the time limits. Again, there's more questions about long-term conditions. Let's see. So I'm a PWP in the prison environment, and while isolation, I have difficulty suggesting exercise of light, moderate intensity to patients as they're in their small pad 23 hours a day. Gym is no longer available. Okay. Do you have any suggestions for what we may be able to suggest to encourage gradual building of exercise in a small room when workout videos and outdoor exercise aren't options? Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think someone's actually replied saying that tiny habits might be useful for that, just to kind of break up those periods of being sedentary. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if even if the people in the prison environment can't have access to videos and things, I wonder if we could be, you know, whether we're the PWP or the kind of professional supporting them, doing a little bit of our own research on like just really simple exercises we could be teaching people. So, you know, whether that's something just like a body weight squats, something they can do like a press up, or even a press up, jogging on the spot, star jumps. These are kind of low risk exercises that, you know, you don't need to be a personal trainer to sort of show people how to do those necessarily. So I think, yeah, maybe doing our own research and just making sure people actually know what they can do. Because again, I guess this links to what I was talking about earlier. People might have an idea that I want to be more active. We might have an idea that we want people to be more active, but do they actually know what is going to be required to do that? And sometimes we use the acronym COMBI, you know, capability, opportunity, motivation. Do they have the capability to exercise? And if they don't, if they literally don't know what to do, we need to be showing them. We need to be kind of giving people access to the information where they can learn. You know, and sometimes that is, I sometimes do this with my clients, literally just checking in that they would have an idea about what sort of exercise they could do. So I think, yeah, again, it's a slightly difficult question to answer, but hopefully it's answers some way there. Do you have any tips for clients doing Ramadan and behavioural activation? Yeah, again, it's a really good question. I think it's an interesting one, obviously, with people who aren't sort of eating and drinking during the day. That is going to affect energy levels, and that is going to affect kind of when is the right time for someone to be exercising or being active. I suppose we might need to be thinking with people who are observing Ramadan, when are the times of the day where they do have energy? And again, is that kind of in the evening when they have been able to kind of eat and drink? Or and I suppose I would be very mindful of the fact that they might have lower energy and lower kind of we wouldn't want to be kind of getting people to do anything massively vigorous when their amount that they're eating and drinking is a lot lower. But I think it's got to be client-led, really. We've got to be kind of thinking with them about what's likely to be helpful. But again, I think the same principles apply, really. Someone said about kind of comfort eating. And do you have any advice to help prevent this, or resources you can signpost me to around comfort eating? Yeah, again, I think this is something that a lot of people are experiencing. Obviously we're in the house a lot. I think there's quite a lot of boredom, and obviously boredom can sometimes lead to comfort eating, and also just as a way of kind of managing stress. I think, again, environmental factors are so key here. How much how much comfort food do we actually have in the house? And I guess we might need to think about planning our shops in a way that reduce the amount that we actually have in. Again, that might sound obvious, but I suppose if we make it less available, is there a way that we can do that? I guess the other thing is, do we have healthier snacks which are easy to eat? Often healthy foods require more preparation. Could we have pieces of apple chopped up so I can just grab them? Can we pre-prepare food so that if I know I'm getting a craving to eat something, I've got easy accessible healthy food, rather than, again, bag of crisps, chocolate bars, which are very easy just to grab and reach. I actually have any kind of snack food in the top cupboard of my kitchen. So it just actually, and again, this might sound silly, but just even that slight having to reach for it sometimes makes me just question slightly what I'm doing and maybe go for something that is a bit healthier. Obviously, it doesn't work every time, but I think I definitely kind of am mindful of how I'm preparing my environment for encouraging healthy eating. Some other people have said about motivational interviewing webinars. Maybe we need to think about that as a future sort of learning need. Okay. Someone's asked about the Brain Train booklet. This was produced by University College London. Now, it is quite hard to get hold of because I think it went into print, but then for whatever reason, it's not been released that widely. I can check whether, because I actually have an electronic copy, and I'll check with someone at UCL if I'm able to share that. Again, I don't see why not. Again, I think there shouldn't be any problem with that, because I think they want it to be disseminated. So I'll double check and can send that out if it's helpful for people. I think we're coming up to time. Hope it has been useful.
Thank you so much, Josh. I found that really interesting. I'm looking forward to starting my tiny habits. I'd like to say thank you so much to Joshua today. It's been really interesting. I've really enjoyed it. The time that you take to watch these webinars, we're really excited to deliver them. I'd also finally, on behalf of SBK Healthcare, like to say thank you to everyone who's involved in the NHS right now. It's such a challenging job, and it's through your dedication and your hard work that makes us so proud of the NHS. And we'd just like to say thank you again.
Cheers, guys. Thanks. Bye.
Hi, everyone. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. Subscribe for latest content, and make sure that the bell button is turned on so that you get a notification when we next upload.